What we do at You Are the Power is we find people whose lives are being just completely upended by local and state level politicians and bad policy. So people that are doing things for bad reasons and are using bad policy to allow them to be able to do it. We basically fight for them until those officials back off and do the right thing. We've had a 100% success rate for the last 2.5 years. And since we were founded just over 3 years ago, we've had well over a 90% success rate. So I'm I think at this point, like a 95, 96% success rate. And while that's an impressive metric, what that actually means is people who are losing their homes to zoning abuse and eminent domain, but they're still in their homes now because the officials backed off. It looks like people that were charged with all sorts of bogus charges where the video footage showed that they didn't do any of these things and that they were being railroaded, and the officials backed off and those charges were dropped. It looks like families who are being wrongfully accused of abuse, when every bit of evidence shows that they weren't abusing their children and their children were being taken from them, their children are now back home and all those charges have been dropped. There's a family in Georgia, Matt and Taki Hernandez, and they have 2 young daughters, Emma and Aria.
My first pregnancy was so perfect, and I thought the second one would be perfect, and I didn't realize that I'm anemic. One day that Emma woke up and she was latching me, and then when she turned her head around, I saw the bruises behind her ears. I actually taken the picture of her eyelid, taking a picture of everything.
We just paid attention to it, and it immediately was fading and healing.
I changed her diaper, and I saw that she had a swollen leg on that Monday.
So they took her to Children's Hospital of Atlanta, where they did x-rays on her. They found fractures in her legs, and I think also in her arms, at various stages of healing. And then they also did a bunch of blood work. The blood work came back indicating that it was being caused by a chronic health condition, most likely either osteogenesis imperfecta or neonatal rickets. There was no sign of trauma, no physical trauma, no sign of anything that indicated a physical cause. So it was not caused by abuse. It wasn't even caused by an accident. It was clearly being caused by some kind of chronic health condition.
One of the old nurse come in first, and she telling me, so your daughter have a broken here. This is only one way she was abused. I was shocked, like, what do you just say?
I was allowed in maybe about 2 hours after we got there. And at that point, I was notified that both DFCS and law enforcement had been contacted.
So they accused Matt and Tucky of abuse. They took both of their children from them. They arrested them for felony abuse. And as a condition of their bond, they weren't allowed to talk to each other or live together or be within a certain number of feet or yards or whatever from each other. So overnight, having done nothing wrong for the crime of trying to get help for their child, who obviously had something wrong with her, they had their children taken from them. They were facing decades in prison each, and they were not allowed to talk to one another as husband and wife or be near each other indefinitely. There was no end date for that. So we found out about it thanks to one of the foster parents who had their children, Jennifer and Jonathan Williams. They had the children temporarily.
Nobody said anything about health concerns at all, which was kind of the biggest red flag for us when we started noticing things with baby Emma. Especially like her head, her skull, just the way she held her little arms and joints. And all babies are different. And she just seemed different. The whites of her eyes were really blue. To the foster parent, like, I'm noticing these things with Emma. Is everything okay? Are there health concerns? She said, did no one tell you? Emma and Aria are in foster care because Emma was abused by her parents. She recently had a broken leg. Why did nobody say anything to us about this? To tell us, hey, be careful with the baby. And the shape of her skull would have nothing to do with abuse. When the girls left, sent an email to the caseworker with all of my concerns.
DFCS response was, your 13 years of service will no longer be needed. Now, Georgia is a state that has such a shortage of foster families that they've lost somewhere around 2,000 children in just the last few years. I mean, they have a crisis of not having enough foster families, and they told this foster family, go away, because they were saying something's wrong here. So thankfully, Jennifer and Jonathan and Jennifer's sister, Mandy, contacted us and said, hey, can you look into this? we looked into this very carefully because we had never looked into a case like this before, and we did not want to inadvertently or even accidentally help actual child abusers. But we looked into it, and it was even worse. They had spent tens of thousands of dollars to get their kids' medical records. The medical records, once they finally did get them, obviously showed there was no abuse. It was being caused by a chronic health condition. They paid to have medical experts, actual specialists in their field, look at the records and go, yeah, there's no abuse here. This child obviously has a chronic health condition. And they thought, thank God, we'll take this to the family courts and this will all be behind us. The family court judge refused to allow any of that to be entered into evidence, and instead took just the testimony of the so-called child abuse pediatrician who accused them of abuse, who brought no paperwork, did not seem to be familiar with the case, and his evidence, quote unquote, was he said, well, yeah, statistically, when you look at these types of cases, they tend to be abuse. And when the lawyer asked him to cite the source of that statistic, he went, you can look it up on the internet. Based on that stellar testimony, the family court judge ordered non-reunification, which meant that Matt and Tucky Hernandez faced never seeing their children again and them being placed in a permanent home. And their kids would potentially always spend the rest of their lives believing that they had been abused by their biological parents. And we're still facing decades in prison each. That's when we found out about it. So we took all that information, we put it out on social media. 3 things happened. First thing that happened was it went viral. And I mean viral. Millions of people saw it. Tens of thousands of people started angrily contacting all the officials that we told them to contact, the CPS worker, the CPS supervisor, the family court judge, everyone involved. That was the first thing that happened. Second thing that happened was everyone suddenly started capitulating. The family court judge said, I see no evidence of abuse here. I'll just close this case out. The DFCS, Division of Family and Children's Services, they said the same thing too. Suddenly they didn't see any abuse here either. And they said, yeah, let's close this case out. We see nothing here. The criminal court judge removed the bond conditions, forbidding them from living together. So the husband and wife, for no particular reason, the criminal court judge allowed the husband and wife, Matt and Tucky, to live together as husband and wife again. And the children were now living with their aunt and uncle. They could not live with their parents yet because the criminal case was still pending, but they were able to see them with a lot less supervision. They were no longer in foster care. They were with their actual family, and the threat of having them placed for adoption, at least for now, was over. So that was the second thing that happened. The third thing that happened was we had families come out of the woodwork from all over Georgia and all across the country with the exact same story over and over again. My child is factually sick, has a demonstrative illness that is the only potential cause for their injuries. There's no evidence for abuse. Everyone who has looked at it has said that there's no evidence for abuse. In some cases, even the Children Protective Services have said there's no case of abuse, but they're still moving forward with trying to take our children and trying to put us in prison. So we started putting their causes out. We started getting them reunified as well. As we were doing that, we found out what the problem was, and it was Title 4E,
where the federal government pays Child Protective Services and everyone down that pipeline, but only if they call it abuse. If they don't call it abuse, they get no money. But if they do call it abuse, even if it turns out not to be abuse, they get money. And if that child ends up being put in foster care, they get even more money. And if that child ends up being taken away from their parents permanently and put up for adoption, they get even more money. And then if it turns out that child has a health condition, they get even more money. So when that pediatrician that is part of this pipeline sees this child with an injury that's being caused by a sickness, they don't say, oh no, this child has this illness, we need to get them treatment immediately. They think, cha-ching, this is the most money we could get.
So we kept moving forward. We just kept plowing forward, kept getting families reunified. And then we reached a critical mass in Georgia. Rebecca Lindstrom with 11 Alive in Atlanta, Georgia, made a documentary about the families that we were helping.
How many of you were accused of abuse after walking through the emergency room doors at Children's Healthcare? Just about everybody.
As a part of that and the content that we put out, the head of DFCS, Candace Brose, contacted us privately and said, I had no idea it was this bad. How do we fix this? Again, she's saying this privately. She's not in front of news cameras going, oh, I'm as shocked as everyone else. This wasn't about political expediency. She was privately reaching out and going, wait a second, I didn't know it was this bad. How do we fix this? So we gave her a list of things that needed to be done. She implemented that as policy immediately. The 2 big things were, if your child is diagnosed with abuse, You have a right to your kids' medical records. You don't have to fight to get them. And you also have a right to get a second opinion from a qualified, certified doctor that is outside of that federally funded accuse as many parents as you can of abuse system. So you actually now have a fighting chance of proving that you didn't do anything wrong. It's still kind of guilty until proven innocent, but it's better than what it was before, which was guilty and not allowed to prove that you were innocent. So it's a baby step, but it's a big baby step. And the other thing is that the child abuse pediatrician that accuses you of abuse has to actually sign and attest that they actually looked at your kid's medical records, because that wasn't happening before. In fact, very often you didn't even know which doctor was accusing you. You'd get a form letter saying you were accused of abuse, and it would have the name of every single child abuse pediatrician that worked in that system, and it could be dozens.
How many of you knew you were talking with a child abuse pediatrician when they were in the room asking you questions?
We found this out later once we got our medical records.
I actually didn't find out until we went to court.
Same.
Well, he didn't meet us in person. He called us on the phone.
So you didn't even know who you were being accused by. So just those two fixes were a big change. We then went to Capitol Hill in Atlanta and to get those policies codified into law. Now, prior to that, we had talked to legislators who weren't really interested in helping us. In fact, one of them told us, well, I'd rather see innocent parents lose their kids than guilty parents not lose their kids.
And so all of this happened within the past few hours, and it was a unanimous vote by the Senate committee to move the measure forward after several mothers shared the years it took to clear their names and how even now they deal with the financial and emotional toll of what happened.
My son was taken away from us, and during my son's first admission, we begged doctors for a second opinion to have someone else to review the records, to which a hand was put in my face, and we were told it was not necessary.
They named it Ridge's Law after Ridge Collins, a child who we helped reunify with his family after they lost him for 3 years. They fought to get him back. It was passed unanimously, and it was signed into law back in May by Governor Brian Kemp. And so we had a major victory there. We've had lawmakers reach out to us in states across the country to say, hey, how do we fix this in our state? Ryan and I were actually in New Hampshire a couple weeks ago speaking to a summit of lawmakers there about how we can get things fixed there. New Hampshire's problem's so bad that they've taken so many children at scale that they've started retrofitting prisons and putting foster children as young as 6 years old in the prisons with juvenile offenders. I don't have to tell you the kind of things that are happening to them. But the good news is we're working on getting a fix to that as soon as we can. So all of this started with that family. Now, if you remember, they still had criminal charges pending. And we thought, that's going to be the easy part. We'd already had 3 other trials. They were a laughing stock. The jury and the judge were laughing at the state's witnesses at how ridiculous their case was, because in every single case, there was no evidence of abuse. You can watch the trials on our YouTube channel where the attorney would say to each state witness, did you see any evidence of a crime? And they go, no. Okay. All right. Next witness. Did you see any evidence of a crime? No. I mean, it was a joke.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Brady Lee Timms, not guilty. We, the jury, find the defendant, Carrie Renee Timms, not guilty.
So we thought, well, this will be a joke for the Hernandez family. Maybe they'll even drop the charges and it won't even go to trial. What we didn't know is that judge was colluding with the DA to railroad the Hernandez family. They weren't going to allow the jury to see any of the exonerating evidence. They weren't going to allow them to hear from the medical experts that Emma's injuries were explained by chronic health conditions. They weren't allowed to hear from the arresting officer because he didn't think they did anything wrong. You ever heard of a prosecutor say, Your Honor, I don't think that the jury needs to hear from the officer who arrested them? That jury heard that. They didn't get to hear that defects in the family court had closed out their family court case because there was no evidence of abuse. They weren't even allowed to hear that Emma and Aria Hernandez loved their parents. Essentially, all they were allowed to see were those x-rays that showed fractures and the opinion of that guy who went, yeah, statistically, this looked like abuse to me.
Find as follows. Count 1, aggravated battery, family violence, not guilty.
Jurors believed the parents were innocent. Emma was sick, not abused. Do you ever regret opening your mouth, coming forward, sharing your story?
I used to think about it
I was thinking, what if I just shut my mouth and not telling anyone?
Would this be done already, or did we just upset the wrong people? All we were doing was fighting for our family, so that has to be the right choice.
Yeah, I think we did a great choice by speaking out.
Thankfully, the jury saw through that and voted not guilty on all 4 counts. And that is directly because of the work of You Are the Power, our attorneys that worked with us on that, because of the volunteers who showed up every single day of the trial and just filled the courtroom. So everyone in the jury saw that everyone there was in support of that family, which had to mean something to them.
They voted not guilty. I have so many people to thank. First, I want to thank all of you that were involved in getting the word out about this family and so many other families that are being affected by defects and rogue CPS agencies across the country. I want to thank literally every single person who is here, who has done so many incredible things for this family and for families across Georgia. I'd like to thank everyone who's a part of You Are the Power. This is just the beginning. We got Ridge's Law passed in Georgia. We're going to get similar legislation passed in the other 49 states, and we're going to do it with your help.
We were able to win on that. And all of that started with one foster care family that said, no, I'm not going to let this happen on my watch. I'm not going to kick the can down the road. I'm going to find someone that can help me on this because something wrong is happening here. So not only was that a victory for the Hernandez family, not only was that a victory for so many other families that we never would have found out about if we hadn't done this, not only has that been a victory for families across Georgia who will never have to face this moving forward because of those changes, and in future in states that will get implemented there as well. It's countless how many people this will affect. I live in Myrtle Beach. Matt and Tucky were down with their kids for vacation, so I got to have dinner with them a few weeks ago. They're back together as a family. This entire nightmare is behind them. That happened because of the work that we do.